I was standing on my front lawn in a terry cloth bathrobe, clutching a mug of lukewarm black coffee, staring at a patch of freshly turned dirt. It was a Tuesday morning in Carmel, Indiana. If you don't know Carmel, it's a place that takes its suburban aesthetics with terrifying seriousness. We have more roundabouts than anywhere else in the United States, and the grass is so uniformly green, it borders on aggressive. But right now, I wasn't looking at the grass. I was looking at a barren, muddy hole right near the curb, where, just 12 hours prior, my mailbox had proudly stood. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Did someone steal my mailbox? I looked up and down the pristine, aggressively quiet cul-de-sac. Nothing. Not a single rogue teenager in a pickup truck. No tire tracks on the lawn. Just perfectly manicured silence. Who steals a mailbox? Is there some underground black market for galvanized steel and little red metal flags that I don't know about? Do people fence mailboxes for scrap? I mean, as a grown man, you try to prepare yourself for the emergencies of home ownership. You brace for a leaky roof, a busted water heater, maybe some termites. You do not wake up at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday prepared to file a missing persons report for a wooden post. I started walking. My slippers were getting soaked in the morning dew. But I was on a mission. I walked down the curb, past my driveway, past the little decorative stones I laid out last spring. And that is when I saw it. 50 feet down the street, shoved aggressively behind a massive, ornamental rhododendron bush near the neighborhood's communal drainage grate. My mailbox. It hadn't been stolen. It had been relocated. Somebody had actually taken the time to dig it out of the ground, carry it 50 feet away, and cement the wooden post into a bright orange Home Depot bucket. It was just sitting there, hiding behind the foliage like a fugitive. What in the actual... I muttered, stepping closer to inspect the bucket. The concrete was still slightly damp. Someone had done this in the middle of the night. It looks much better there, don't you think? I whipped around. Standing on the sidewalk behind me, clutching a metal clipboard like a shield, was Brenda. Brenda was the architectural committee chair for our homeowners association. She was a woman who treated the HOA bylaws like they were handed down on stone tablets. She was currently wearing a pastel pink velour tracksuit, a pristine white visor, and a pair of aggressively sensible walking shoes. She had the kind of sharp, calculating squint that let you know she was constantly measuring the height of your grass with her eyes. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Why is my mailbox in a bucket behind a bush?" She offered a tight, completely humorless smile. "It was ruining the sightlines, David." I stared at her. I looked at the mailbox. I looked back at her. "The sightlines?" "Yes," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "The architectural committee did a walkthrough of the cul-de-sac yesterday evening. We determined that the placement of your receptacle was highly disruptive to the symmetry of the street. It was jutting out. It violated the spirit of the neighborhood's aesthetic. Brenda, it was exactly where the builder put it 10 years ago. It's where the mail carrier delivers the mail." "Well, it was an eyesore," she countered, adjusting her visor. "So I took the liberty of hiring my handyman, Gary, to move it last night. I didn't want to disturb you. You're welcome, by the way. The street looks much more cohesive now." I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who was rapidly detaching from reality. "You hired a man to come onto my property, in the middle of the night, dig up my mailbox, and hide it in a bucket down the street?" "It's not hiding," Brenda sniffed, clearly offended. It is strategically obscured by the rhododendron to maintain the natural beauty of the communal easement. It's a very common landscaping technique. Brenda, you stole my mailbox. I most certainly did not. I relocated it. As the architectural chair, I have the authority to enforce aesthetic compliance. You don't have the authority to touch my property. I was raising my voice now, the bathrobe flapping slightly in the morning breeze. Put it back. No, she said simply. Put it back, Brenda, or I'm calling the cops. She actually chuckled. A high-pitched, grating little sound. Oh, please do, David. Go ahead. Call the police over a mailbox. Let's see what they say. In the meantime, I suggest you read Section 4, Paragraph B of the HOA bylaws regarding unauthorized curtilage modifications. She turned on her heel, her sensible shoes squeaking slightly on the pavement, and power walked away. I didn't read the bylaws. I went inside, grabbed my phone, and called the Carmel Police Department non-emergency line. I explained the situation to the dispatcher. Yes, my neighbor took my mailbox. No, she didn't take it away entirely. She put it in a bucket. Yes, I know how stupid this sounds, but it's the principle of the thing. An hour later, a cruiser rolled up to my house. I had changed out of my bathrobe and into jeans and a t-shirt, trying to look like a respectable member of society who just wanted to receive his mail. Officer Miller stepped out of the car. He was a guy who looked like he was about 3 days away from retirement, sporting a heavy mustache and an expression of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. He walked up to me, thumbs hooked into his duty belt. You the guy with the wandering mailbox? Yes, officer. Thank you for coming. I pointed down the street. It's right down there, behind the bush, in the orange bucket. Officer Miller slowly turned his head, squinted at the rhododendron, and then looked back at me. He let out a long, heavy sigh. All right. Walk me through it. I gave him the rundown. I told him about Brenda, the midnight landscaping raid, the architectural committee, the sight lines. I pointed to the muddy hole on my property line. She trespassed. She vandalized my property. And I want to press charges for theft. Just as I finished my sentence, Brenda appeared. Because of course she did. She probably had a police scanner in her kitchen. She came marching down the sidewalk, clipboard securely in hand. Officer, she called out, waving her hand. Officer, I am so glad you're here. I am Brenda Vance, president of the HOA Architectural Committee. Officer Miller closed his eyes for a brief, painful second before turning to face her. Ma'am, did you move this gentleman's mailbox? I relocated an aesthetic violation that was out of compliance with our community standards. Brenda corrected him smoothly. I have the bylaws right here. She shoved the clipboard toward his chest. Officer Miller didn't even look at the clipboard. He looked at the dirt hole. He looked at the bucket down the street. He looked at Brenda. And then he looked at me. Listen to me very carefully, folks, Officer Miller said, his voice flat and devoid of any joy. I deal with domestic disputes. I deal with traffic accidents. I deal with teenagers breaking into the community pool. I do not deal with HOA squabbles over shrubbery and metal boxes. But she stole it, I protested. It's 50 feet away, son. It's not stolen. It's trespassing. Did you see her do it? He asked. Well, no, but she just admitted she hired a guy to do it. Officer Miller shook his head. Look, she claims she has the right to move it based on your neighborhood contract. You claim she doesn't. This isn't a criminal matter. This is a civil matter. A civil matter. The two most frustrating words in the English language. So you're not going to do anything? I asked, my voice tight. She can just come onto my lawn and rip things out of the ground? I suggest you take it up with the HOA board or take her to small claims court, Officer Miller said, already turning back toward his cruiser. Have a nice day, folks. Try to get along. He got in his car and drove away without looking back. Brenda turned to me, a look of absolute, unadulterated triumph on her face. It was the look of a conqueror who had just planted her flag on my front lawn. As I said, David, she purred. "Read the bylaws. If you attempt to move that receptacle back to the non-compliant location, the HOA will fine you $50 a day until it is resolved. Have a blessed morning." She strutted away, leaving me standing there fuming. I was vibrating with rage. I walked over to the rhododendron bush, grabbed the orange bucket, and tried to lift it. The handyman had filled it to the brim with high-density concrete. It weighed at least 150 pounds. I couldn't even budge it. I went back inside and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the wall. This couldn't be happening. I was a grown man being bullied by a woman in a pink tracksuit over a metal box. My blood was boiling. I was already calculating the cost of a lawyer, figuring out how to sue the HOA, wondering if I should just sell the house and move to a cabin in the woods. Just then, I heard the familiar hum of the USPS mail truck turning onto the cul-de-sac. I jumped up and ran to the window. The little white truck with the blue and red stripes slowly rolled down the street. It stopped at the neighbor's house to my left. The carrier leaned out, dropped some envelopes in the box, and drove forward. He approached my house. He slowed down. He looked at the empty dirt hole. He hit the brakes. I watched as the mail carrier leaned out of his window, looking extremely confused. He looked left. He looked right. He completely missed the orange bucket hiding behind the bush 50 feet away. He shook his head, put the truck in drive, and rolled right past my house. I bolted out the front door. "Wait! Hey, wait up!" The mail truck stopped at the neighbor to my right. The carrier, a younger guy named Marcus, who always wore a bucket hat, looked at me in the rearview mirror. I jogged up to his window, slightly out of breath. "Hey, Marcus, you skipped my house." Marcus looked apologetic. "Yeah, man, I'm sorry. You don't have a mailbox." I know, I panted, pointing down the street. "My crazy HOA neighbor moved it. It's right down there. In the bucket, behind the bush." Marcus squinted down the street. He saw the bucket. He looked back at me, his expression hardening into pure bureaucratic protocol. "I can't deliver to that man." "What? Why not? It's right there." "USPS regulations," Marcus said, tapping the steering wheel. "A mail receptacle has to be at a specific height, facing a specific direction, and permanently secured at the approved point of delivery. I can't leave federal mail in an orange bucket behind some leaves. It's not a secure or approved receptacle anymore." "Come on, Marcus. I have credit card statements coming today. I have my monthly hot sauce subscription box in that truck. I know you have it." "I'm sorry, David, truly. But if I deliver to an unapproved location, I can get written up. I have to mark your address as no receptacle and return all your mail to the post office. They'll hold it for 10 days, and if you don't fix it, they start returning it to sender." I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Marcus said. He held up a bundle of envelopes bound in a rubber band. "I gotta take this back. You need to put your box back where it belongs. The HOA is going to fine me $50 a day if I do." Marcus shrugged, offering a sympathetic wince. "That sucks, man. But my boss is the postmaster, not your HOA. Get it fixed." He put the truck in gear and drove off, taking my hot sauce and my bills with him. I stood in the middle of the street, the morning sun beating down on me, completely defeated. Local cops wouldn't help. The HOA was holding my property hostage. The Postal Service cut me off. Brenda had won. She had weaponized the bureaucracy of the neighborhood to completely ice me out of the federal mail system. I walked back to my house, head hung low. I sat down on the couch and pulled out my phone, opening Google. I was desperate. I typed in, "HOA moved my mailbox, what do I do?" The results were a mess of legal forums, angry Reddit threads, and lawyers offering consultations for $300 an hour. A lot of people said exactly what Officer Miller said. It's a civil matter. Sue them in small claims. But then, as I scrolled deeper into a particularly unhinged law forum, my eyes caught a phrase that made my heart skip a beat. 18 U.S. Code Farrier 1705, Destruction of letterboxes or mail. I clicked the link. It took me straight to the Legal Information Institute at Cornell Law School. I started reading. Whoever willfully or maliciously injures, tears down, or destroys any letterbox or other receptacle intended or used for the receipt or delivery of mail on any mail route shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both. I blinked. I read it again. I opened a new tab. I searched for 18 U.S. Code FOS 1701. Obstruction of mails generally. Whoever knowingly and willfully obstructs or retards the passage of the mail, or any carrier or conveyance carrying the mail, shall be fined under this title, or imprisoned not more than 6 months, or both. I slowly lowered my phone. The gears in my brain were turning, grinding against each other until they caught and started spinning at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Officer Miller was right. Local cops don't care about mailboxes. To the Carmel Police Department, a mailbox is just a piece of metal on a wooden stick. But to the federal government? Once that box is planted in the ground and designated for the receipt of the United States mail, it undergoes a magical transformation. It ceases to be my personal property and effectively falls under the jurisdictional protection of the federal government. Brenda hadn't just moved a piece of wood. She had forcibly relocated a federal mail receptacle, and in doing so, she had successfully obstructed the delivery of the U.S. mail. She hadn't committed a local civil infraction. She had committed a federal crime. A slow, terrifying, and deeply malicious grin spread across my face. Brenda wanted to play with bylaws? Fine. We could play with bylaws. But I wasn't going to use the little pamphlet the HOA handed out at the welcome mixer. I was going to use the United States Code. I immediately grabbed my laptop and searched for the nearest field office of the United States Postal Inspection Service. A lot of people don't know about the USPIS. They think of the FBI, the CIA, the ATF. But the postal inspectors are the unsung, utterly terrifying heavy hitters of federal law enforcement. They carry guns, they execute warrants, and they do not mess around when it comes to the mail. They have an absurdly high conviction rate because their jurisdiction is so insanely ironclad. I found the number for the regional office in Indianapolis. I dialed it. United States Postal Inspection Service, how can I direct your call? A crisp voice answered. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, masking the pure adrenaline rushing through my system. I need to report the willful destruction of a federal mail receptacle and the ongoing obstruction of U.S. mail delivery. There was a brief pause on the line. 1 moment, please. I'm transferring you to an inspector. Hold music played. It was some smooth jazz. It felt incredibly surreal. Inspector Vance? A deep, gravelly voice answered. Inspector Vance, my name is David. I live in Carmel, Indiana. What can I do for you, David? Sir, last night an official from my homeowners association trespassed onto my property, dug up my USPS-approved mailbox, and relocated it to an unapproved location 50 feet away without my consent. As a result, my mail carrier refused delivery this morning, and my mail is now being obstructed. Inspector Vance went silent. I could hear the faint sound of him typing on a keyboard. An HOA official dug up your box? Yes, sir, she admitted to it. She claimed it was an aesthetic violation of their bylaws. I heard a sharp exhale over the phone. It wasn't an exhausted sigh like Officer Miller's. It was the sound of a man who dealt with federal fraud all day and suddenly found a very stupid, very clear-cut violation dropped right into his lap. Did she destroy the box? Vance asked. She removed it from its legal delivery point and cemented it into a bucket. She essentially rendered it useless for its intended federal purpose. And the carrier couldn't deliver? He told me to my face he had to return it all to the post office. "All right, David," Inspector Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into full law enforcement mode. "Here is what we are going to do. We take violations of 18 U.S.C. 1705 very seriously. However, to initiate a formal investigation and send agents out, we need to establish that you are in compliance, and she is the aggressor. I need you to reinstall a USPS-compliant receptacle at the original, approved point of delivery. Inspector, if I put it back, she's going to fine me $50 a day, and she'll probably just hire her guy to rip it out again." "David," Vance said smoothly, "if you place a compliant box at the approved location, and she touches it again, it elevates the situation from a prior obstruction to an active, documented federal offense. We will have jurisdiction to intervene immediately. So you want me to set a trap? I want you to re-establish your federal mail service," Vance corrected carefully. "What she chooses to do with that federal receptacle after it is legally installed is entirely her choice. And her liability." "Understood," I said. "Get a box in the ground, David. If she touches it, you call me directly on this number." I hung up the phone. My hands were actually shaking. Inspector Vance told me to put a box in the ground. But I knew Brenda. If I just went to the hardware store, bought another wooden post, and dug a hole, she would have her handyman rip it out before the concrete even cured. I needed something stronger. I needed a mailbox that Brenda couldn't move. I needed a mailbox that God himself would struggle to relocate. I opened the HOA bylaws PDF on my computer. I skipped past the sections on grass length and paint colors, scrolling down to Section 4, Paragraph C, Mail Receptacles. I read it very carefully, parsing every single word. All mail receptacles must conform to USPS guidelines. Furthermore, to maintain the architectural integrity of the neighborhood, the structural support of the receptacle must incorporate masonry that matches the primary brickwork of the resident's home. I read it again, and then I started laughing. The HOA, in their infinite, controlling wisdom, mandated that mailboxes had to be made of brick to match the houses. They wanted everything to look expensive and uniform. But in their rush to mandate aesthetics, they had made a colossal, fatal error in their drafting. They mandated the materials. They mandated the compliance. They completely forgot to mandate a maximum size or weight. I didn't just need a handyman. I needed a specialist. I picked up my phone and called a guy I knew from my old job, a guy named Mike. Mike owned a masonry and hardscaping company. Mike was a guy who drank 6 cans of energy drinks before noon, had forearms like tree trunks, and harbored a deep, spiritual hatred for homeowners associations because they were constantly rejecting his patio designs. "Mike," I said when he answered, "how busy are you this week? I'm pouring a driveway on Thursday, but I got a gap today and tomorrow. What do you need? You finally putting in that fire pit?" "No, Mike. I need a mailbox." "A mailbox?" "Dave, I don't do handyman stuff. Go buy a post." "Mike, you don't understand. My HOA stole my mailbox. I need a new one. It has to match my house's brick, and it needs to be completely, utterly indestructible." There was a long pause on the line. I heard a can snap open and the hiss of carbonation. "How indestructible are we talking?" "I want it to survive a direct hit from a snowplow," I said. "I want it deep. I want it reinforced. I want it to be a permanent, immovable monument to federal mail delivery." Mike let out a low whistle. "They messed with you, huh? They dug it up and put it in a bucket, Mike." "I'll be there in an hour," he said, his voice instantly dropping into a tone of aggressive professionalism. "I'm bringing the auger." When Mike rolled up in his massive F-250, pulling a trailer loaded with bags of quick-rate, rebar, and a cement mixer, I knew I had made the right choice. He stepped out of the truck, took one look at the muddy hole, and shook his head. Amateurs, he grunted. All right, let's look at this brick. We walked up to my house. He chipped a tiny piece of mortar off the side, held up a color swatch, and nodded. Standard colonial red blend. Easy. How big do you want this thing? I handed him a printout of the HOA bylaws, highlighting the section on mailboxes. Read this. Tell me what it doesn't say. Mike read it, his eyes tracking back and forth. A slow grin spread across his face, mirroring the one I had earlier. It doesn't say how big the footprint can be. It just says it has to support the box and match the house. Exactly. Dave, Mike said, slapping me on the shoulder. We aren't building a mailbox post. We are building a fortress. For the next 6 hours, my front lawn turned into a heavy construction site. Mike wasn't messing around. He didn't just dig a hole. He brought out a motorized auger and drilled 4 feet into the Indiana clay, well below the frost line. He dropped in a cage of heavy-gauge steel rebar, tying it together with wire. If someone tries to pull this out, Mike yelled over the roar of the cement mixer, they are going to take the entire tectonic plate with them. We poured the footer, filling the 4-foot hole with high-strength concrete. While we waited for it to set up enough to start laying brick, Brenda made her appearance. She came speed-walking down the street, her visor pulled low, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. She stopped at the edge of my property line, her eyes widening in horror at the cement mixer, the piles of bricks, and the massive steel cage protruding from the ground. "David!" she shrieked. "What is the meaning of this?" I walked over, wiping concrete dust off my hands. "I'm reinstalling my mailbox, Brenda, just like the post office told me to." "You are operating heavy machinery in a residential zone without prior architectural committee approval," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the mixer. Mike, who was currently eating a sandwich while sitting on the tailgate of his truck, didn't even blink. "City code says I can operate residential construction equipment until 7 p.m., lady. Call the mayor if you don't like it." Brenda glared at him, then turned back to me. "I warned you, David. You are installing a receptacle in an unapproved location. I am levying a $50 a day fine against your property starting right now." "Go right ahead, Brenda," I said, smiling politely. "Just make sure you mail the fine to my new box. Once it's finished, of course." She went completely red in the face. "This is an outrage! I will have our handyman rip that monstrosity out of the ground the minute you are finished." I leaned in closer. "Brenda, I highly recommend you do not touch this mailbox when it's done. I am telling you this for your own good." "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm giving you a warning. That box is federal property. Do not touch it." She scoffed, a loud dismissive noise, and scribbled furiously on her clipboard. "You will be hearing from the HOA attorneys, David." She spun around and marched away, furiously dialing her cell phone. Mike walked over, chewing his sandwich. "Pleasant lady. You have no idea," I said. "Let's build this thing." Mike did not build a mailbox post. I mean, honestly, he built a load-bearing pillar that looked like it belonged in the structural foundation of a highway overpass. Once the concrete footer had set up enough to hold weight, Mike backed his truck right up to the curb, dropped the tailgate, and started mixing a fresh batch of Type S mortar in a plastic trough. He was humming some heavy metal song under his breath, completely in his element, trowel in hand. The guy was an artist, I guess, if your medium was industrial-grade masonry and pure, unadulterated spite. "All right," Mike said, slapping a thick layer of gray mortar onto the concrete base. "Here's the game plan. We are going 3 feet wide at the base. Solid brick exterior, matching your house perfectly, but the inside? The inside is the secret sauce." He pointed to the cage of thick steel rebar jutting up from the ground. "We are building the brick shell around this steel, and as we go up, I am going to fill the core with solid, high-strength concrete. Not the quickset garbage. The real deal. The kind of concrete they use for bank vaults." "Mike," I said, handing him a brick, "are you sure this is entirely legal?" I mean, look at the bylaws you handed me, he said, tapping the trowel against the brick to seat it into the mortar. Does it say anything about a maximum weight capacity? Does it say I can't pour a solid core? No, it literally just says it has to be masonry matching the house. Then we are aggressively compliant, Dave. I am giving your HOA exactly what they asked for. I am giving them the most structurally sound, aesthetically cohesive piece of architecture on this entire street. For the next 4 hours, I basically played assistant to a mad scientist. I hauled bricks from the pallet to the curb. I fetched buckets of water. I watched as Mike meticulously laid row after row of standard colonial red blend bricks, using a level on every single course to make sure it was absolutely, perfectly plumb. Neighbors started coming out of their houses. I saw Mrs. Gable from across the street peeking through her blinds. I saw the guy from 3 doors down slowly driving past in his golf cart, staring at the construction site with his mouth slightly open. In Carmel, Indiana, any unapproved landscaping was treated like a scandal, but what we were doing looked like a military installation. By sunset, the monument was complete. It was a monolith. It stood 4.5 feet tall, tapering slightly at the top, crowned with a custom-cut piece of limestone that Mike had somehow procured from the back of his truck. And resting securely inside that limestone cap, bolted directly into the solid concrete core with heavy-duty wedge anchors, was a brand-new, extra-large, heavy-gauge steel mailbox. I stood on the sidewalk, wiping sweat from my forehead, staring at it. It was magnificent. It looked like it could stop a runaway freight train. "How much does that thing weigh?" I asked. Mike leaned against his truck, cracking open his 5th energy drink of the day. With the 4-foot footer, the rebar cage, the bricks, and the solid concrete core, I'd say you're looking at roughly 2,000, maybe 2,500 pounds of dead weight. Brenda's handyman is going to have a stroke if he tries to dig this up, I said, a grin creeping across my face. "Dave, if someone wants to move this," Mike laughed, wiping mortar off his hands with a dirty rag, "they aren't going to need a shovel. They are going to need an excavator, a jackhammer, and a municipal permit. This thing is now a permanent geographical feature of the Earth." I paid Mike, tipped him extra for the entertainment value, and went inside to sleep the sleep of the truly justified. The next morning, I was up at 6 a.m. I made a pot of coffee, walked out to my front porch, and sat in a lawn chair. I was waiting. The trap was set, but it wasn't armed yet. For the trap to be armed, the United States Postal Service had to officially recognize the bunker as an active, compliant delivery receptacle. At 10:30 a.m., the familiar hum of the mail truck turned onto the cul-de-sac. I leaned forward in my chair, holding my breath. Marcus, the mail carrier with the bucket hat, was doing his route. He stopped at the neighbor to my left, dropped off the mail, and rolled forward. I watched as he approached my property line. He hit the brakes. He leaned out the window of his little white truck. He took off his sunglasses. He just stared at the brick fortress for a solid 30 seconds. I walked down the driveway, coffee mug in hand. "Morning, Marcus." Marcus looked at me, then back at the monolith. "Dave, what is this?" "This," I said proudly, "is my new HOA-compliant mail receptacle. The structural support incorporates masonry that matches the primary brickwork of my home. Just like the bylaws demand." Marcus let out a low whistle. He stepped out of the truck, walked over to the box, and placed his hands on the sides of it. He pushed. Nothing happened. He leaned his entire body weight against the brick. It didn't even vibrate. "Dude," Marcus said, looking at me with a mixture of awe and slight terror. "Is this solid concrete?" "Rebar reinforced," I nodded. "It goes 4 feet into the ground." Marcus started laughing. He opened the heavy steel door of the mailbox. He checked the height against his truck window. He checked the distance from the curb. "Well?" I asked, suddenly feeling a spike of anxiety. "Is it compliant?" Marcus pulled out his scanner, tapped the screen a few times, and grinned. Height is exactly 42 inches from the road surface. Setback is exactly 7 inches from the curb. The door operates smoothly. Dave, I am officially approving this receptacle for federal delivery. He walked back to his truck, grabbed a thick stack of mail, including my hot sauce subscription box, which was wrapped in fragile tape, and placed it gently inside the steel box. He closed the door with a satisfying clank. "You're back on the grid, man," Marcus said, tipping his bucket hat. "Good luck with the HOA." "Thanks, Marcus." He drove away. The second his truck turned the corner, the trap was armed. The box was no longer a landscaping project. It was an active, federally recognized, legally protected instrument of the United States government. I didn't have to wait long. I went back up to my porch, sat in my lawn chair, and opened my hot sauce box. I was literally just reading the ingredients on a bottle of Ghost Pepper Reserve when I heard the squeak of Brenda's aggressively sensible walking shoes. I looked up. Brenda was marching down the street, and she was not alone. Trailing behind her was a guy in stained denim overalls and a faded baseball cap. It was Gary, the neighborhood handyman. Gary looked like a guy who just wanted to fix leaky faucets and hang drywall, but Brenda was dragging him by an invisible leash into a suburban war zone. And resting on Gary's shoulder was a 16-pound, long-handled sledgehammer. I put my hot sauce down. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and pulled up Inspector Vance's direct number on the dial pad. I kept my thumb hovering over the green call button. "David!" Brenda shrieked from the sidewalk. She wasn't wearing the pink tracksuit today. She was wearing a beige windbreaker, apparently her tactical gear. "Good morning, Brenda," I called back from the porch, not getting up. "Beautiful day for a walk." "Do not play games with me," she yelled, pointing at the brick obelisk at the end of my driveway. "I told you yesterday that this unauthorized monstrosity would be removed. I levied fines against you and you ignored them. You have forced my hand." I took a sip of my coffee. "Brenda, I really honestly think you should turn around and walk away. I'm trying to save you a lot of trouble." "The only trouble here is you," she snapped. She turned to Gary, who was standing there looking extremely uncomfortable. "Gary, knock it down. Break the masonry apart and pull the post out. We'll drag it to the dump." Gary stepped forward, slipping the sledgehammer off his shoulder. He walked up to the brick fortress. He tapped the side of it with the metal head of the hammer. Clink. Mrs. Vance?" Gary said, his voice hesitant. "This isn't wood." "I know it's not wood, Gary. It's brick. That's why I told you to bring the sledgehammer. Break it!" I stood up and walked halfway down my driveway. "Gary," I said, keeping my tone entirely calm and reasonable, "I want to be very clear with you. That structure is a federally approved mail receptacle. It currently contains United States mail. If you damage it, you are committing a federal crime under Title 18, Section 1705. I don't think you want to do that." Gary looked at me. His eyes went a little wide. He lowered the hammer. "Federal? Don't listen to him, Gary," Brenda screeched, stamping her foot on the pavement. "He is lying. It's a blatant violation of the community bylaws. The HOA is authorizing this demolition. I am authorizing it. Now swing the hammer." Gary looked at Brenda. He looked at the massive brick pillar. He looked at me. He gripped the fiberglass handle of the sledgehammer, adjusting his footing. "Gary, I'm telling you," I warned him one last time, "that is not hollow." Gary took a deep breath, raised the 16-pound sledgehammer over his head in a wide arc, and brought it down with everything he had right onto the center of the brick column. Thwack. There was no crumbling. There was no shattering of brick. There was only a sickening metallic ringing sound that echoed off the houses in the cul-de-sac. Physics is a beautiful thing. When you strike a hollow brick wall, the energy disperses and the bricks break. When you strike 2,000 pounds of solid rebar-reinforced concrete wrapped in brick, the energy has nowhere to go. So it travels right back up the handle of the hammer. The sledgehammer violently recoiled. Gary let out a sharp yelp, dropping the hammer onto the grass as if it had caught fire. He stumbled back, clutching his hands to his chest, shaking them frantically. "Son of a—" Gary hissed, his face pale. "My hands! I can't feel my fingers." "What is wrong with you?" Brenda yelled at him. "Hit it again!" "Hit it again!" Gary shouted, his Midwestern politeness completely evaporating. "Lady, did you hear that sound? That thing is solid concrete. It's like hitting a bank vault. The shockwave just blew out my elbows." "You are a contractor. Do your job." "My job is fixing gutters, Brenda," Gary yelled, scooping up his sledgehammer with trembling hands. "I'm not bringing down a structural support column for $20 an hour, and I'm definitely not catching a federal charge over a mailbox. I quit. Find some other idiot to do your landscaping." Gary didn't even look back. He power-walked down the street toward his truck, muttering a string of profanities that would have definitely violated the HOA's decency clauses. Brenda stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish. She watched Gary drive away, and then she slowly turned her gaze back to the brick fortress. Her face was turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. The veins in her neck were bulging. She was experiencing a total, catastrophic collapse of her suburban authority. "You think this is funny?" she screamed at me, her voice cracking. "I think it's legally binding," I replied, hitting the green call button on my phone and putting it to my ear. "Inspector Vance," the gravelly voice answered immediately. "Inspector, it's David and Carmel," I said loudly, making sure Brenda could hear every word. "My mail receptacle has been installed and approved by the carrier. The HOA president is currently on my property attempting to destroy it with a sledgehammer." "Are you in a safe location?" Vance asked, his tone instantly shifting into a terrifyingly calm, operational cadence. "I am on my porch. She is at the curb. Do not engage her. Agents are already in your sector. We have a unit 3 minutes out." "Copy that," I said, and hung up. I looked at Brenda. "They're on their way, Brenda. It's over. Go home." But Brenda was gone. The rational, clipboard-wielding, by-law-quoting woman had completely short-circuited. She looked at the heavy sledgehammer Gary had dropped in his haste. She walked over and picked it up. "Brenda, do not do that," I said, my voice losing its snark. I was genuinely shocked. "I mean it. Put the hammer down." "This is my neighborhood," she shrieked, hefting the heavy hammer with surprising strength, fueled entirely by psychotic rage. "I enforce the aesthetics. I uphold the property values. You do not defy the committee." She swung the hammer. She wasn't strong enough to hit the bricks with the force Gary used, so instead, she aimed high. She brought the metal head of the sledgehammer crashing directly into the front door of the heavy-gauge steel mailbox. Clang. The metal dented inward. The little red flag snapped off and went flying into the grass. She swung again. Clang. She was panting, her hair escaping her visor in wild tufts, repeatedly bashing the front of the federal receptacle. "Aesthetic! Violation!" she screamed with every swing. She was literally committing a felony in broad daylight, in front of a dozen neighbors who were now standing on their lawns, recording the entire thing on their cell phones. It was the most magnificent, catastrophic self-destruction I had ever witnessed. Clang! Just as she raised the hammer for a fourth swing, a vehicle turned aggressively onto the cul-de-sac. It wasn't Officer Miller's tired white police cruiser. It was a completely blacked-out, late-model Chevrolet Tahoe, with dark-tinted windows and heavy municipal plates. And right behind it was a second identical Tahoe. They weren't using sirens, but the grille lights were flashing a blinding, synchronized strobe of red and blue. The two SUVs accelerated down the street and aggressively angled into the curb directly in front of my house, blocking Brenda in. The heavy doors popped open almost simultaneously. 4 men stepped out. They were wearing dark tactical pants, dark polos, and heavy external ballistic vests. Emblazoned across the back of the vests in massive, bold yellow letters were the words, "Postal Police." The man who stepped out of the passenger side of the lead vehicle was tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He was wearing a gold badge on a chain around his neck. "Drop the hammer! Step away from the receptacle!" one of the agents bellowed, his hand resting securely on the holster at his hip. Brenda froze. The sledgehammer slipped from her manicured hands, clattering loudly against the pavement. She looked at the 4 heavily armed federal agents surrounding her, her eyes darting around in absolute, genuine panic. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda stammered, her voice trembling. She instinctively reached into her windbreaker pocket. "Hands where I can see them, ma'am," the agent barked. Brenda threw her hands in the air, a crumpled copy of the HOA bylaws fluttering to the ground. "I am the president of the Architectural Committee. Who are you?" The tall man with the gold badge walked slowly toward her, his eyes locked onto her face. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely, professionally indifferent, which was somehow much more intimidating. "Ma'am, I am Inspector Vance with the United States Postal Inspection Service," he said, his voice deep and carrying easily across the silent street. "You are currently standing in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1705, willful destruction of a mail receptacle, and Section 1701, obstruction of mails." Brenda's mouth opened and closed. She looked at the dented mailbox, then back at Vance. It's an aesthetic violation. The bylaws state—" "Ma'am," Inspector Vance interrupted, his voice slicing through her defense like a scalpel. "The United States federal government does not recognize your homeowners association bylaws. The United States federal government recognizes its own property and its own designated delivery routes, and you have just assaulted federal property with a deadly weapon." I was just—" Brenda stammered, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on her. The tracksuits, the clipboards, the petty neighborhood authority. None of it meant anything to the men standing in front of her. She was a big fish in a tiny manicured pond, and she had just jumped directly into the ocean. "Are you David?" Inspector Vance asked, looking over Brenda's shoulder at me. "Yes, sir," I said, stepping forward. Vance looked at the massive 2,000-pound brick fortress. He looked at the dented steel door. He looked at the little red flag lying in the grass. I saw the absolute faintest hint of a smirk touch the corner of his mouth before he suppressed it. "Did she damage the mail inside?" Vance asked. "I don't believe she breached the interior compartment, Inspector," I replied. "Good," Vance said. He turned back to Brenda, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Brenda Vance, you are under arrest for destruction of federal property." "Arrest?" Brenda shrieked, stepping back, tears suddenly welling in her eyes. "You can't arrest me. I live here. I'm on the board. This is a civil matter." "It ceased being a civil matter the moment you touched that box, ma'am," Vance said, stepping forward and firmly grasping her arm. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." It was, honestly, like watching a Greek tragedy unfold in real time. Brenda, the terror of Carmel, Indiana, the woman who had levied thousands of dollars in fines over paint shades and grass clippings, was being perp-walked down my driveway in handcuffs by federal agents. The neighbors were dead silent. Every single one of them was recording. This was going to be the most watched video in the history of the neighborhood Facebook group. They placed Brenda in the back of the second Tahoe. Inspector Vance walked back over to me. He handed me a business card with the Department of Justice seal on it. "We have it all on the dash cams, David, and we have multiple witnesses," Vance said, his tone conversational again. "She's going to be facing some very serious fines, and likely federal probation. We'll be in touch for your official statement." "Thank you, Inspector," I said. "I really appreciate it." "Nice masonry," Vance noted, tapping the brick with his knuckles. "Structurally sound." "It's compliant," I grinned. Vance nodded, got back into his SUV, and the two black Tahoes rolled out of the cul-de-sac, taking the president of the architectural committee with them. The street was quiet again. I walked over to the brick monument. I picked up the little red metal flag from the grass. The steel door was dented, but it still opened and closed perfectly. The fortress had held. The aftermath was spectacular. Brenda didn't go to federal prison. First-time offender, no prior record. But the USPIS didn't let her off easy. She was hit with a $5,000 federal fine for the destruction of the box, ordered to pay me full restitution for the repairs, and placed on 2 years of federal probation. But the real victory was the collateral damage. You cannot serve as a board member of an HOA if you have an active federal conviction on your record. Brenda was forced to resign her presidency in absolute, humiliating disgrace. The new board was terrified of me. They immediately rescinded all the fines Brenda had levied, and they passed a motion stating that my brick mailbox was officially grandfathered into the neighborhood aesthetic. I guess they realized that sending violation letters to a guy who had the postal inspectors on speed dial was a bad business model. Gary the handyman wouldn't even look at my house when he drove by. So next time your HOA tells you to move your property or tries to bully you with a clipboard and a pastel tracksuit, remember, they might rule the neighborhood, but they do not rule the mail. Read the statutes, find the loopholes, and let the federal government do the heavy lifting. Stay sovereign.